Have you ever wondered why the rich get richer and others don't? Could it be that a small percentage of the population seek out others to find, study, and execute on legal loopholes that exist within our financial life and make it easier for them to prosper? The answer is a resounding yes. This is the Secrets of the Wealthy podcast with John Mintz. John has spent a lifetime researching and mastering the financial loopholes that he believes should be available to everyone. Join us as we explore different strategies that help you get farther faster towards building and enjoying a prosperous retirement.
Hello and welcome to the Secrets of the Wealthy with John Mintz. John, what's going on?
Well, good morning and happy Thursday to you. I don't know, all kinds of good stuff going on. Got lots to talk about today.
All right. Well, I know that normally when you start these off, you want to do a market update. And I know that this is also part two of a two-parter series, unless there's going to be three. I'm just not sure. But sounds like we're going to do two, yeah?
Yeah, at least two, maybe three, maybe four. Who knows?
All right. All right. Well, let's start with that market update for everybody.
Super. Well, so I want to start by just kind of just saying and reminding everyone we're recording this on August the 24th of 2023. The S&P 500 is up roughly 14%, a little bit more for the year, after being down as much as 25% last year. So we made up some ground. The Dow is up about 3%, give or take, after being down 10 or 11 last year. So we've made up some ground this year a little bit. And remember in the last show, I was starting to speak positively about the markets, and it's continuing to do so. But in the last month, the month of August now, 3 weeks in, the market started pulling back. I'm not sure what's going on there, but I did say in our last meeting that I felt like the markets were still somewhat overvalued. But I do have some different concerns going in to this show today, Eric. I'm going to just read you some findings that I discovered from a recent Fed study. But you remember earlier this year, I'm trying to remember which show it was, but it was probably somewhere late first quarter of this year on one of our shows. I had told folks about that we could be experiencing some difficulty in the second half of the year. And I warned everyone that the money that we had received through the pandemic was going to burn out at some point, probably end of the summer, I think I said. And then I found some findings here yesterday, and I want to read it to some folks. But this is a study done by the San Francisco Federal Reserve. It says Americans are burning through the excess savings they accumulated during COVID-19 pandemic. Now, this was, remember that big burst of stimulus money? I think it was 5.4 trillion total between three different bills that the federal government pushed out, right? And that made a positive impact. But the findings from this study show that households could deplete that cash reserve this quarter. This quarter meaning the end of next month. So, which was, I mean, what's really ironic about it is people were saving, from all that money, and they were saving and put more money away, and they're paying credit cards down. And now it seems to be the reverse. In fact, the reserve also estimates, they suggest that households held less than 190 billion of excess savings by June. Now that sounds like a lot, but it's really not. And so this is generating quite a bit of cause for concern, because the Federal Reserve credited, the whole savings buildup due to the economy rolling due to the savings buildup. But that's obviously changed now. So they expect a slowdown in consumer spending. I expect a little bit more than a slowdown. I expect almost a halt. Because here's how it gets worse. So Americans have been turning to their credit cards. Remember, we talked about that too. Not only would they burn through their savings, but they'll burn through their credit card limits. And so the New York Fed reported early in August that debt topped 1 trillion. We're just talking credit cards, 1 trillion for the first time ever.
Just credit cards?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. And in a 3-month period from April to June, credit card debt surged a trillion, an increase of 45 billion, or 4.6% from the previous quarter only.
Wow.
Highest level ever on record. And so you've got depleted savings, on top of rising credit card debt is going to be a problem. And then on top of that, here's the icing on the cake, I guess, as the old saying goes, is that now, of course, the Biden student loan moratorium and or forgiveness program, which was kind of stopped, well, the student loan payments are going to resume in the fall on top of all that. And I was talking to one of my clients who said that, her estimate on her student loan payments are going to be roughly $600 a month.
Yeah.
And she doesn't really have a ton that's owed. And so, I mean, these folks, they're living paycheck to paycheck. Here comes another $600, right? So crazy, crazy, crazy stuff. But what I am saying is this, on top of inflation, everything else, that I think this last part of this year, whatever we have here, 4 months and some change, I think is going to be kind of rough. And like I always say, the same thing. I know it sounds like a broken record, but balance is key right now. I don't think we want to take all our money out and put it in the backyard, right, and bury it. But at the same time, we need to be balanced and make sure that we have a balanced retirement and balance in terms of savings and liquidity and in the markets, right? So anyway.
Yeah.
So on that note,
I saw a headline. It was just a blip. I didn't even get deep into the article, but it was saying something very similar where it said people's student loan payments are now replacing their mortgage, right? Where it's, I mean, not fully, obviously. Very few people out there have a $600 mortgage, but their student loan payment, as much as they saved by refinancing their home or buying a new home when the interest rates were really low because of not having to pay at that point or whatever, now these things are coming back, and everything they saved and more is now going into having to repay those student loans. So it's kind of a flip-flop for a lot of people, where the student loans were smaller payments and the mortgage was really high, and now it's going the opposite direction, which doesn't help anybody really.
Yeah, I mean, I went on a cruise recently to Alaska. I think I told you about, and I did post pictures, by the way, at your request to that last podcast link. But anyway, it was beautiful. But more importantly, I was talking to one of the directors, or I don't know what you call them, the crew directors, and they told me. I asked them, what their occupancy rate was, and he said, "Well, we're pretty much full all the time, every time." And I thought about that for a minute. I thought, wow, like how are folks, I know it's kind of tough out there. How are folks still going on cruises, and how they filling these ships up because there's a lot of people to get on those ships, right? 4, 5, 6,000 people. And like I said, I think sometimes we just keep spending until we can't spend anymore. And it sounds like that's where we're getting. And so I don't know, tough times coming, maybe lots of layoffs coming. I'm not trying to be the bad guy here, but I'm just trying to make people aware of what's coming so that they can prepare for it and save their pennies for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's a possibility somebody needs to prepare for sure. Somebody needs to hear the message. Yeah.
Well, I've said it for a year and a half now. I hope on this one I'm wrong. So, right. I really would like to be wrong on this, but I don't think the numbers are saying so.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Now on to the rest of the show. Like I said, this is a two-parter. So can you give us just a little bit of kind of a recap of what part one was?
Yeah. Let's do that. So in part one of the series, we call this Taxes and Retirement. And in part one, we covered the complexity of the tax code. And then we went from there into the history of income taxes and what that meant. We discussed the Secure Act and the changes in the law and how that's going to impact us from a tax perspective. One of those being how money is transferred from generation to generation. And the other is how it changed RMDs, required minimum distribution, meaning forced income, when the government's going to be forcing money out of our taxable accounts. We discussed how we don't really have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem with our government. And then finally, we talked about, at the close, we just said, hey, how many changes do we have to go through this tax code before we wake up and become proactive about getting a retirement tax plan or a tax plan in general, right? And I think that's about where we left off. Do you think that sounds right, Eric?
I think so. Yeah. I'm pretty sure you're spot on.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay. So today we're going to move into some other things that are going to be or have affected taxes, some of them negatively, but some of them positively, if we know how to take advantage of those. So we're going to jump into some of those today. And Eric, feel free to chime in too as we go through this. Okay.
All right.
But so we talked about the Secure Act last time. So today I want to talk about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. And Eric, do you think that helped individuals or corporations?
Okay. Now that you threw that other part in there, I think it did a little bit of both.
Good. Yes, and it did do some of both. Some of it was permanent and some was temporary. But corporations got a permanent reduction from 35% to 21%. And it made us really, really competitive. And there was great economic expansion during this time. The markets blew up that year, as you remember, and continue to do so. And it was phenomenal to watch happen. And that was permanent. But we got tax cuts on average about 3%, some a little more, but that was temporary. And that expires in 2 years, 4 months, and about 7 days. I mean, I asked folks when I'm teaching some of this stuff in classes, I ask folks if they think taxes in the next 20 years will be lower to raise their hand. And I have yet to have somebody, and I've been asking this for several months now. And I've yet to have somebody raise their hand that they think taxes are going to be lower. Then I say, well, do they think they'll be the same? And every now and then I'll get one that'll raise their hand. And then I'll ask if they think they'll be higher. And the whole group's hands go up, right? Because the truth is the law already says they're going to be higher, right? Because when that act expires, which we'll talk about in a minute, and then the next question I ask is, does anyone believe they will retire to a lower tax bracket? I mean, how many of us were told this? Hey, just defer your taxes and you'll be in a lower tax bracket when you get to retirement, right? I mean, I was told that early on when, I was being encouraged to start my 401k. And don't get me wrong, I'm glad I had that 401k still today. But the truth is, it's a myth. The reality is only 4% of Americans actually retire to a lower tax bracket.
Really? That is way lower of a number than I thought you'd say.
Yeah. 4%. It's just not true. Yeah.
Wow.
4%. And, if you look at different studies, you're going to get a different number depending on who's doing the study, right? But from the studies I've looked at, it's 4%. If we double the number, 8%, it's still really, really low, right? In fact, it's mainly because of forced income being RMDs, right? Meaning required minimum distributions, where the government's forcing money out of those taxable accounts. So at a certain age, that money's going to get forced out. So now we've got money coming out of our 401ks and IRAs because it has to. That's going to get taxed. And that's on top of our pension, which is also going to get taxed. And now all that's thrown on top of Social Security, which is causing that to get taxed. And by the time you add all that up, folks just aren't in necessarily a lower tax bracket. They might have been at a 12% tax bracket when they retired, and now they're 12, which is soon to be 15% tax bracket, right? So you probably know the answer to this. We've had this on previous shows, Eric, but I asked the question, what is the highest tax rate in American history? And before you answer, the top bracket today is 37%, right? Well, it's actually 94%.
Yeah. I'll see. Now I was going to say 92, so I was still off.
Yeah.
94. God dang. That's
yeah. And history has a way of repeating itself, right? So we need to learn from it. We need to refrain from making the same mistakes. One of one of the funniest quotes I ever heard was a Mark Twain quote. It's hard to say Mark Twain quote. So, but he said, "History never repeats itself, but it does often rhyme."
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
right. So we can and get the point being we need to learn from our mistakes. But the history of taxes is, what the first ever tax bracket was? That was the first year we had taxes, and that first tax top bracket was what percent? Can you just guess?
The very first tax bracket,
Uh-huh.
you would think that they'd try to ease it in gently, right? So I'll say 30%, but I know I'm off.
Yeah, you're off just a little bit. 7.
Okay, so they did ease it in slowly.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, I thought they were going to
Yeah.
be more greedy than that. So
Yeah.
way to go, government.
Well, yeah. Then they figured out they could
That
raise
moment.
it,
Yeah, right.
and they figured out they could raise it, and it was off to the races at that point.
I bet.
But from 1913, it went really high to pay for the First World War. Then it came back down. Then World War II, and it went up again. But then it actually got up into the 90s for a little bit. And the primary reason that most folks believe that happened is because our debt to GDP at that point was equal to 100%, meaning we had as much debt as we did production at that time as a country. But then it came back down for quite some time until 9 years ago, 8-9 years ago, depending on when you're looking. And at that point, we got back to 100% debt to GDP, and still climbing. And when I looked the other day, we were up to 129% debt to GDP. I mean, it's just simply unsustainable. There's no way to continue at this level of debt and interest on our debt. So we have a record debt. We have a record debt to GDP. So we know taxes are going up. Law says so, right? So how high can they go? I mean, I don't know.
Do you, John, let me ask you a question. Do you think that, I mean, looking at the last 9 to 10 years, like you're talking about, do you think it's a situation where their politicians specifically are trying to do the smoke and mirrors game, where they are throwing everything else at us, the media is throwing everything else at us besides what's truly going on behind the curtain, as they say, right? It feels like there's so many other things they want to draw our focus to besides this, and make a big deal of all these other issues and things that get people riled up, so they don't actually see, oh crap, this is unsustainable.
Well, I'm old school in a lot of ways, and so as you're sitting there saying that, Eric, an analogy popped into my head. So let's just say that you and your wife had a significant amount of debt, and so you got to the point where the debt's just continuing to rise on you. Let's just say credit card debt, to make it simple. That credit card debt, it was $20,000, then it was $60,000, then it was $130,000 in credit card debt. That's a lot of credit card debt, right? And then one day you sit down and you say, okay, we got two choices here. We can just keep enjoying the fruits of our labor and just keep running, using credit cards to manage our lifestyle, and then eventually we'll file bankruptcy. Or we can just batten down the hatches, we'll work harder, we'll spend less, and we'll just knock this out. Well, if you choose the second option, it's just not a lot of fun, right? It's the right thing to do, but it's not a lot of fun. And so now you think of whatever administration is in there in the office, so they have the same choice, really. So are they going to choose to say, well, let me lead the country through this. It's not going to be very much fun, and I'm sure not going to be popular, and I'm definitely not going to get reelected. Or do I choose the other route, and maybe I get another term in office and move this country in the direction that it's going, which is not the right one, as it relates to the debt. And that's where we're at. I don't think anybody wants to be the one paying the piper.
Well,
So
yeah, and I don't want to continue that analogy in a bad way, but and I don't think the American people are children, but as you brought up, a family has to make a decision, and you can have two parents. We've seen this before, two parents that nobody wants to be the bad parent, right? They don't want to be the one that's, oh, his dad's really, man, he's no fun. He's making us, we can't take a vacation this year. We don't get any new shoes, blah, 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 right? Mom wants to, oh no, we got to give the kids everything.
Yeah.
And it could be completely flip-flopped as well. And I feel like those are the two political parties, right? Nobody wants to be that bad guy, just like you're saying. And although we're not children, our fate in a lot of ways is in their hands with the decisions that they make. Just like kids don't have a lot of control over what their parents do.
Yeah.
We got some bickering parents that need to grow up. Just saying.
Well, your analogy is way better than mine. But you hit the nail on the head, brother. That's where we're at. It's nut cracking time. It's just, I don't know. I don't know where we go from here, truthfully, but I do know this, that there's only two solutions. And one of those solutions is that we dramatically cut the spending, which we just talked about.
Yeah.
And I don't realistically think that's going to happen. So the only other solution is to dramatically increase taxes, which is going to be equally, if not more so, painful.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, like I said, I hate, I wish I could just come on here and just talk about unicorns and rainbows. It'd be a lot more fun, but it's not going to help anybody, right? Anyway, the moral of the story is, before I say that, the average tax rate over the last 110 years, which is how long we've had income taxes, is 63.8%. That's the average, and we're at 37. So I don't know where taxes go from here, but I know one thing: if we're not doing some proactive tax planning, you're going to wind up paying more than your fair share of taxes, period. Here is a statistic that I read, and I find it kind of hard to believe, but it's from the Tax Foundation. According to the Tax Foundation, the average American will pay over $280,000 of income taxes that they are not required to pay in their lifetime.
Wait, what?
That's what I said.
How so?
Yeah. The average American will pay over $280,000 of income taxes they are not required to pay in their lifetime.
Okay, how do we fix that? I don't want to pay extra.
It kind of hits you hard, doesn't it? So, and so I think about that for a minute, and I think, well, what if we could save folks just $100,000 on their future retirement taxes?
Yeah.
I'm not saying we eliminate taxes. We can never eliminate taxes. We have to pay taxes, right?
Of course.
But we can certainly pay it in a more optimal way, and for sure make sure we're not paying taxes that we don't owe.
Yeah.
So
seriously.
Right. So yeah, saving significantly more than 100,000. And I think that's a nice place for us to kind of segue to the next series. With this will be at least a 3-part series, and get the audience excited about coming back next time, because next time I'm going to talk about ways that we can save taxes. I'm actually going to get into individual strategies, at least 3 or 4 different strategies on how to do that. We have a lot more strategies than what I'll be able to have time to share, but we're going to share multiple strategies, some of which folks probably haven't even heard of before. So please come back and join us for the next show. But before we close today, Eric, I do want to let the listening audience know that I'm sad. I'm really sad when I say this. I really mean it. This is not tongue in cheek. I'm sad to report that Eric, you'll be leaving the show, but I think for a very good reason. And if it's okay with you, would you mind, Eric, sharing with our listeners where you're going and what you're going to be doing?
Yeah, absolutely. John, I hate goodbyes, right? So here's the thing is I'm going to be listening, first of all, because I've already subscribed to the podcast. I already subscribed to it. But you were just talking about how you and your team work with folks to save them, money on their taxes for long term, to help reduce that. And that's, you do a lot of future planning to set people up for success. You and I are our hearts are knitted in that way. And my wife and I used to work for an organization years ago for about 12 years called Boys Town, and that's in Nebraska. It used to be outside of Omaha. Omaha actually kind of grew around it. And there's a 1938 movie called Boys Town starring Mickey Rooney and Spencer Tracy. They won an award for that, and the Oscar is actually in a little museum here at Boys Town. But we work with at-risk youth. And so during that time, the first time around, we had 68 young men live with us. And that was what we did. We helped build a foundation and help them come from a pretty bad situation to be more successful for the rest of their lives, to set a foundation, like we were talking about just a little bit ago, moving in a way that kind of changes their trajectory, right? Well, just like every other organization, John, Boys Town's having a hard time finding family teachers. It's difficult to find people that will live with 8 teenage boys 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you know, and take care of them, especially coming out of, you know, their really, really tough situations. But they've asked us to come back as family teachers. And after a lot of prayer and consideration, Candy and I, my wife Candy, and I have decided to go back to family teaching. And one of the things is that we cannot have a second job, because raising 8 kids is a pretty full-time job. So that's what we're doing. And I know you and I've talked about this quite a bit. We love what we do. I've loved being a part of this podcast, and, you know, just learning from you. Honestly, this has been a joy for me, and I've really, really benefited from it. So thank you. But yeah, we love what we're going to be doing. And actually currently we're in the home. We've been in here for a few months. It takes me a little while to wrap up the show here. Wanted to make sure we transitioned it well. And I know you've got another great co-host coming right alongside you, and she's going to learn a ton from you as well. So I'm excited to continue listening. But yeah, I mean, if you've got any questions, John, I'm more than happy to answer anything for you. But Boys Town's a great organization that does a lot of work with kids, and their success rate is huge on kids that are coming out of lockup and then changing their trajectory and helping them to be very, very successful. And honestly, I think I've told you a couple stories, but out of those 68 boys, we keep in contact with most of them. I say boys, but now they're like 35. They've got families and kids, and they're successful business owners, and it's amazing to watch that. You know, so it's fun, and it's great to be back doing this as well.
Yeah, I coached middle school basketball for a while, a volunteer basis. Of course, didn't get paid, and to watch those young men grow up and just prosper and become great young men, it's so exciting I mean, on a much smaller level. I understand what you're saying, but man, I've always known, Eric, that you and your wife have a heart for God. When you have a heart for God, you have a heart for others.
Yeah.
Because, you know, our time here is minuscule in comparison to eternity, and you want to serve others. And it just speaks volumes for the character of you and your wife. And I'm excited for these young men that they get to have a piece of you become a piece of them for the rest of their life. That's really cool. But you'll be sorely missed. I can promise you that. And we wish nothing but God's infinite blessings on you, your wife, your family, and your calling to these young men, for sure.
No, I appreciate it. And I think I've told you before, but there are seats at my table for you. It's a long table. It seats about 14 people, but dinner is always a pretty interesting event, you know, with all of us sitting around. And my wife, of course, she does the majority of the cooking. She loves it. She's back in her element. When we left, she didn't stop cooking for 14 people, so I got a little bit bigger. Now it's more justified, but there's a seat at my table, John, for you and your family to come and eat and experience what Boys Town is, because it's pretty amazing, and I think you'll have a good time.
That would be an absolute honor. Thank you.
You bet. Well, what do you think? You got that next part coming out. Let's give some contact info, because I know that folks are going to learn a ton on that next one, just like they have over the last two. But if they want to talk to you personally and say, hey, look, I really want to tackle this now, I don't want to wait till that next episode comes out, how do they get a hold of you?
Yeah, and I want to say this. I don't think I've ever said this before, Eric, but, you know, just like you see your calling is exactly what it is. It's you know, it's your God-given calling to go serve these boys. We feel the same way about the folks that God sends to
Absolutely.
us.
Yep.
And so even if folks just have questions that they just want to get answers to, you're free to call us. There's no obligation or anything other than just getting information. We're here. If you're in need, we're here for you. But you can reach us directly at 817-225-6260. Or if you want to just schedule a phone consultation without talking to us directly, then you can do that at our website, which is www.biltmore-financial.com.
Perfect. John, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Same to you, my friend.
You bet. And one last time, the last thank you goes to you, the listening audience. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to the Secrets of the Wealthy podcast with John Mintz. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when John comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it really easy to share these podcasts with your friends and family. Again, thank you so much for listening today. For everyone at the Secrets of the Wealthy, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Secrets of the Wealthy podcast with John Mintz. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of John Mintz. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.